I have the pleasure of doing the introduction here of Todd Myers. Todd Myers is, in my opinion, the brightest environmental mind who advocates for free market ideologies around environmental issues. He's from Seattle, Washington, and we have the pleasure of having him on ACC's board. Todd has been incredibly supportive of our efforts and this effort here with the Green Generation 30 Under 30 for quite some time, and he believed in me as a 19-year-old coming to an Irish pub to meet with him for lunch, and I couldn't order a drink. He's trusted me since then to work with this organization and our team and build it up to the point where it is today. Really proud to have him on our board and for his voice as a strong policy voice working on free market ideologies within the environment. So without further ado, Todd Myers, and he will welcome up the next panel, and then we will go right ahead. And I will read off the names here. We have Evan Lutz from Hungry Harvest, Maher Damak from Infinite Cooling, and Stafford Sheehan from the Air Company. So welcome.
Thank you, welcome. As I said, my name is Todd Myers. Just a tip for you when you're running an organization. You're the president of a new organization. One good thing if you want to get your budgets approved is to have lots of compliments for board members. That will do great things for you getting your budget approved. So I worked in environmental policy for about 20 years. Worked at the Washington State Department of Natural Resources where we did issues. We dealt with old growth forests, we dealt with spotted owls. I currently deal with salmon recovery and orca recovery in Puget Sound. And after 20 years of working in environmental policy, I recognize the power of government and politics, as the last panel discussed. But I've also seen that some of the most interesting ideas are coming out of business, and they're not coming out of policy. And one of my heroes, Muhammad Yunus, who won the 2006 Nobel Prize for his work in microfinance, has a saying that says, when I see a problem, I don't wait for government, I start a business. And that's what these three have done. So I'm very pleased to have each of them. We'll go one by one, and I want you to introduce and talk a little bit about the program that you're working on and the business that you're trying to start, and answer this question, which is, how can companies with a for-profit model help the environment where a non-profit organization or politics could not? So, go ahead.
Let's go. Hi everyone, my name's Evan. I'm the CEO of Hungry Harvest. Is this on? Hello?
No. Hello. Nice. My name's Evan Lutz. I'm the CEO of Hungry Harvest. We are a produce delivery service on a mission to fight food waste and hunger. So about 40% of everything we grow in the United States ultimately goes to waste. We help reduce that waste by sourcing produce from farms, delivering it via direct deliveries to our weekly subscribers all across the East Coast and Midwest. And for every box we deliver, we also help somebody eat healthy. So we're kind of like an e-commerce produce delivery service, trying to build a more inclusive food system. And your answer to your question is exactly what inspired me to start a business. I've had an epiphany for a very long time that social entrepreneurship is kind of the most powerful tool on the planet to create change. There's a really interesting kind of, I'm really fascinated by economics and incentives. So if you look at a company, and this is why I think social entrepreneurship is so powerful. If you look at a company like, say, Coca-Cola, right? Or any company, any for-profit company. Coca-Cola does some cool things. They make a product and they sell it and make a profit, right? And with some of that profit, they use some of that to build drinking wells in rural villages in Africa, right? Done really good work. But there's inherently an inverse incentive there, right? Because the more wells they build in Africa, the less profit they make. What I've always been really fascinated by is this idea that you can actually align those incentives in business. So that the more profit you make, the more impact you make. You're not sacrificing profit for impact or vice versa. So that's where I think the real innovation comes in. Is it started with the Tom's buy one get one, right? And Newman's own donating 1% profits to charity. The incentives are aligned. The more profits they make, the more that 1% grows. But then it's kind of evolved into like, okay, the actual product you're selling is good for the environment. It's not just buy one, give one, or it's not just you're donating something. It's actually the product is inherently good for the environment. And then there's ways to get it. There's ways to kind of introduce employment practices that are more inclusive and better for the environment. So there's like a ton of different things that businesses have gotten into that have aligned the incentive of profit and impact. That's really, really fascinating to me in the past, I would say 20 years or so.
Yeah, so thanks for the invite. It's an honor to be here with a bunch of very talented people. So my name is Maher Damak. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Infinite Cooling, which is a company that whose mission is to help mitigate water scarcity. And water scarcity, as you all know, is one of the biggest challenges of this century. In fact, the UN and the US State Department say that we are on the path to an extreme freshwater shortage by 2030, so in the next 10 years. And one of the things that not a lot of people know, maybe people here know, but water usage by industries is very high, and specifically power plants and some other industries are responsible for over 40% of freshwater withdrawals in the US. And in terms of consumption, just cooling systems for industrial plants account for as much water usage as the whole US residential sector, almost. So it's a huge water usage. And I did my PhD at MIT in engineering, and I was working on this problem, on finding solutions to reduce water usage by power plants specifically, and also data centers, chemical plants, and all of those. And we developed a new technology that can reduce this usage by capturing some of their waste that they emit. And just to let you know, basically water is used mostly for cooling in what's called cooling towers, where it evaporates and then it's all wasted as vapor. So we developed a technology that can capture part of that and recycle it back. So what's now a waste stream can be turned into a value stream of very pure water. And that reduces costs for these customers, so they don't have to buy more water to treat it, and also has a big environmental impact. And I completely agree with what you said, and I would say the way for-profits can help the environment in ways that non-profits or government cannot is really by aligning those incentives, financial and environmental, and with that you can have a much bigger impact. And I think impact is a main thing for me. So you can do great things with legislation or non-profits, but for non-profits, for example, you're limited by how much money you have or things like that. Whereas if you have a for-profit, if you make people save money, then really, obviously there are a lot of challenges about operations, execution, all of that, but then people better use your solution and save money. So businesses try to maximize profit. So if you help them do that while helping the environment, I think you can reach a scale that's much bigger than other ways. And I think it's all complementary. Government can introduce legislation to make this easier, to reduce the barrier to entry, or allow businesses to use your solution and save money. But yeah, I think there's a huge role for profits to play in the environmental transition.
That was a really good answer, and I just want to say it's a big honor to be here, and thanks to ACC for making the green generation 30 under 30 a thing in the first place. A lot of legwork done by a lot of really smart young people. My name is Stafford Sheehan. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of the Air Company. We develop technology that turns carbon dioxide into value-added products. Namely, I use something called electrochemistry, and that really is just what it says. It's electricity to perform chemistry. We take carbon dioxide out of point sources. We combine the carbon dioxide with water under pressure over catalysts, And those catalysts use electricity to scramble the atoms around until you make oxygen. So kind of like a tree, we breathe out oxygen. All of our plants breathe out oxygen, no pun intended. The byproduct of that, or the main product for us, is alcohols and hydrocarbons. Using this technology, whereas you guys are conserving water and trying to improve our water resiliency, we are trying to improve our atmospheric resiliency, and that's why we're called the Air Company. To answer the question as to why for-profit companies are, I think, crucial to solving environmental problems, it's really a matter of scale. If you're relying off of philanthropic capital, if you're relying off of capital that people are essentially giving you to try to people that are giving you capital to try to maybe improve the environment, but it's not necessarily tied to an economic incentive, then it's really challenging to scale something up to global scales where you can really have an impact on global water security or global clean air or food security. So really, in order to get to scale, you have to tie your environmental advantage to your revenue, not necessarily your profit. That's kind of like one of my favorite examples of this is show of hands. Who here would, let's say there's two companies. One makes $50,000 one makes $50,000 a year in revenue, and it spends around $40,000 a year, so it makes 10 grand in profit. That's company number one. Company number two makes it doesn't make a profit. It breaks even, but it makes $200,000 in revenue and spends $200,000. Who would rather have company number one, the one that makes 10? Show of hands. Who would rather have company number one than the one that makes $10,000 in profit? Okay, who'd rather have the one that breaks even but makes $200K in revenue? All right, we have all the entrepreneurs with our hands up, I guess. There was a smattering on either side, but I'd rather have the company that makes the higher revenue because that's a higher value company on an open market typically. So that's kind of, I think it's better to tie environmental conservation to revenues rather than profits.
So starting a company is very difficult and getting to where you are. So I'm going to ask you, what can we do to promote entrepreneurship and innovation in companies that are directly addressing resolving environmental issues like you guys are? And what does it take to build these types of companies? You're all very impressive, right? People who are watching may have a business idea, say, well, I'm not like them, right? They're impressive. But give them some words of encouragement about how they can get to where you are and start a company based on your experience. Go ahead, Stafford.
All right. I think I think it's going to be slightly different based on whether or not you're starting a company based on new technology or new business model. What I do is I'm starting a company based on a new technology. So I developed a technology that could have an environmental impact, and I'm trying to find a way to to implement that technology in a way that is both environmentally friendly and generates a viable, scalable business model. So from a technology standpoint, have a really good idea that could save people money. That is something that is high tech that you could potentially protect, and something that you can potentially move forward with. Now, I'm probably not the best person. This is my third tech startup with two that actually, one was a successful exit and the other was is still operating and is profitable now. So all of those essentially followed on the have a really good science idea beginning. So I may not be the best person to answer that question for something that is not a hard tech company, but I think we might have someone here who could.
I love this question because I'm not good at school. I learn outside of the classroom, and my whole thing is you don't have to be Steve Jobs, right? We tend to put, I talk at a lot of colleges and universities, and when I tell people that a main theme of my talk is like we should stop worshiping Steve Jobs. Most college speeches that you go to, you'll see, you can do anything, be the change you want to be in the world. Steve Jobs, blah blah blah, bullshit. Actually, no. you don't have to build $1 billion company in order to be really successful, right? Because that sounds really intimidating, and that actually probably turns a lot of very qualified, very passionate entrepreneurs off from wanting to do entrepreneurship. It all starts with just an idea, and just talking to people about your idea, and then starting to develop a product, and then seeing if you can sell that product, and then actually selling the product. And that's literally how I started. I didn't know anything. When I started this, I was a senior in college, and it was basically a school class project. I didn't know anything about marketing, logistics, management, knew nothing about produce, nothing about supply chain. And I just kind of saw this idea and started to sell produce at a farm stand, and then realized it was working, and so I started a delivery service and realized that was working, so I hired more drivers and hired more people and started a website. And I didn't know how to do any of that, right? And the whole thing was, I always thought this was going to be a failure. Right? I never thought this was going to be a $1 billion idea. I was always surprised at the success of it. And when you have that mentality, right, that you're going to learn at every failure, you're not going to expect success, you can really lower the barrier to entry to entrepreneurship. Now, of course, there's completely different paths of entrepreneurship you can do. You can start with a science background, and you can start with tech ideas, and those are very, very admirable and really hard to do. The path that I came from was, I was just passionate about saving produce from going to waste and feeding hungry people. I didn't know what the solution was going to be. I just kind of tested it, learned along the way, and tried to find out what was working. And that's really all you need, is just like kind of the I'm going to fail and that's okay attitude is really what's kept me going to this point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's important to just do it and start actually doing stuff as soon as possible, not think too much. But I'm going to talk about technology-based startups because that's my background as well. But I think we should start doing it, but also try to be a little organized. So first, if you're developing a technology, I think it's very important to know there is a problem first and identify a problem, not develop something and then find a problem for what you made, but rather start with a problem and make a solution for that specific customer or issue that you found. And then I didn't know any entrepreneurship related stuff before. I didn't know anything about sales or how you form a company and all of that. But you can. I think the most important thing is to realize that it can all be learned. It's not that hard. So yeah, surround yourselves by people who've done it or who know more than you, and kind of start doing stuff and learn from mistakes. I think that's the most important thing from my perspective. And I think the other question was how companies can help innovation in sustainability. And I think one thing would be at least for big companies and things like that, would be to work more with startups and new technologies. So right now, impact is measured by people invest. Most big companies will do kind of use technologies that are proven, install a few solar panels or do stuff like that. And it's not a big risk. They know exactly what they're doing and how much it will cost, how much it will generate, and all of that. But if they could spend more and do more stuff with startups and kind of get credit for that, so commit to trying new technologies and kind of help tomorrow's environmental solutions, not just what exists today. I think that can also help accelerate the development of these new technologies, because one of the biggest problems for a lot of these companies is finding their initial customers, and a lot of big companies don't want anything to do with stuff that's not proven, and then how you get to from an idea or a new technology to a proven product, that's really the tricky part. And if people start helping during that phase, I think that can help a lot of new companies.
So one of those technologies, you talked about companies developing new technologies. So Coca-Cola company has a technology called plant bottling. So it's the typical plastic bottle, but 30% of it is made out of renewable resources, made out of primarily sugarcane. And so that's a renewable, environmentally friendly source, and yet corporations, people are skeptical. of corporations and what they're doing and how they can help the environment. So in the for-profit sector, how can you deal with that sort of skepticism about what you're doing, your role in helping environmental sustainability, and how can you change that message so that people see you as part of the solution rather than worrying about you being part of the problem?
Yeah, I think transparency is one of the most important things there. So if companies start sharing all their information about their footprint and what their environmental impact is today and what are the steps they're taking. So if sometimes you give statistics, and as a person who studied math a lot, I find that very annoying. But you give partial statistics. You say I saved this amount of CO2, but we don't know how much you use in total. Is that 1%? Is that 5%? What's really the impact of those measures you're taking? So I think having that kind of transparency would help a lot in making them more credible. And also, we were talking earlier about aligning profits or money incentives and environmental incentives. And I think if companies also talk more about that, a lot of environmental initiatives actually end up being profitable. They make money out of those. So if you say, yeah, I did this because of the environment, but also to make money, that's also much more credible, because I think all people trust companies to try to maximize their profits and to make money. That's they're not trust them when they say, okay, we're doing this for the environment and things like that. So if you say those two things are the same, actually, I think you become much more credible.
Yeah, I think it comes down to authenticity in marketing as well, and making sure your message is not gimmicky or not making is unique as well. We're not playing on recent fads or trends, but really trying to say what you actually do instead of saying something that's really viral or hot right now in the environmental space. I see a ton of companies trying to play on issues that are really trendy in the environment and really aren't authentic about doing it. And so I always preach a message of, even if it's going to earn you less customers, authenticity is super, super important, because consumers in this day and age are used to being distracted and tricked and run the gamut through companies' marketing schemes.
As Volkswagen can probably tell you, once you lose your credibility, it's gone forever. And that, in terms of, your marketing ability to say that you're doing something environmentally friendly or environmentally good. Now, I think that the biggest issue that a lot of the bigger companies have is transparency. I would agree with that. A lot of larger corporations they'll give you a statistic about how some innovation they made to a product is XYZ, more carbon friendly or water friendly or environmentally friendly, but they don't give you a really thorough. The number of large corporations that actually engage in life cycle analyses or sustainability reporting is, a lot of them just don't want to know how bad their products actually are. And this comes from prior to shortly after my PhD and prior to starting a previous startup to this that I worked in. I used to work as a consultant for a lot of large companies as an environmental engineering consultant, and I've seen firsthand that a lot of them just don't want to look under the hood. So I think kind of incentivizing or otherwise, either via marketing or from a more board level perspective, incentivizing people to actually understand what they're doing is really important.
So we have a little bit of time for questions, so if people have questions, raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone to you so folks here can hear you. And the good thing about being in the first panel is that you get to ask a question of the second panel, so go ahead.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so my question is really just about how you guys respond to, as business people, right, in the environmental sector. There's, obviously a bit of a tinge on environmentalism that it's very tied to a growing socialist movement in the United States. How do you respond to the critics that say that you're just out for profit and that's not tied to environmentalism?
So the question is, how do you respond to critics who say, well, you're not really out for being in the environment, you're just out for profit? And it sounds like also part of it is the other side, which is that some people in business are skeptical of environmentalists.
Right.
And how do you sort of bridge that gap? So.
I have a quick answer to this one. Come to our facility and look at all the data, or have your expert look at the data. And we're numbers people. At least I'm a numbers person. My co-founder, who's our CEO, he might not be a numbers person, but I'm a numbers person. When you measure what's going in, you measure what's going out. I'm a firm, it's not really believer because it's an absolute truth. Conservation of matter, the fact that you cannot create or destroy matter, is generally correct. And if you look at the data from a lot of the work that my company is doing, a lot of other companies are doing, we're honest and transparent about it. And it goes back to the transparency thing that I was saying. So that's, I guess, my magic bullet solution to that, which I'm sure most people are completely ignorant of data. So I'm sure it probably won't be a very good solution for the masses, but that's why I'm the technology guy, not the marketing guy.
Yeah, I think I would say if people ask why, if we're doing this for profit, the answer would be yes, we are doing this for profit, but profit is directly correlated to environmental impact. So when I go talk to investors to invest, I don't tell them I'm an environmentalist. I say I'm building a company to make profits and help the environment. Those two things, you can't do one without the other with a company. And I think that's the short answer. And if we have a big impact on the environment, our customers will make profits, we will make profits, the investors will make profits, and everyone, it's a win-win-win situation, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
So I actually disagree that the purpose of business is to make profit. The purpose of business, in my opinion, it's a widely shared opinion that's been popular over the past probably 30 or 40 years, is that businesses exist to create value for different stakeholders, right? Profit is one of those values for shareholders. It's a big one. You can't do much without it, right? Profit is really, really important. But businesses really also exist to create values for employees, the vendors, the customers, the environmental community, and again, the shareholders. The way we look at it in Hungry Harvest, if we create a really great workplace for our employees, we're creating a ton of value for our customers, be really honest and authentic in how we're communicating with them. If our vendors know exactly what we're doing and why we're buying from them, we give them really good value, and we show dedicated causes towards our community environment. Ultimately, our profit's going to be higher than if we just focus on profit. So I don't think this idea that businesses exist to make a profit is very Milton Friedman kind of coined that in the 60s and 70s, and I fundamentally disagree with that, or at least that's not how we practice business. We try to create values for all of our stakeholders.
I think we have time for one more question. If there's one more, I don't see anybody. So yeah, so right here. Oh, over here.
Sure. So, I'm sorry, I came a little bit late, so I'm not sure if you've answered this question, and if you have, you can tell me to shut up. But I was wondering, you all talked about transparency, and I think that's a really pertinent point. What are some incentives or punishments that you as business people are okay with seeing for a greater level of transparency, whether you think that should be government-based or more society, from a societal or cultural standpoint? Or if that's even possible, I guess.
Yeah, I would say the best thing, according to me, would be the companies started doing that, because people start doing that due to pressure from their customers and then pressure from their competition. Once a few companies start doing that, that would be the best way. I don't really know how effective a regulation would be in this case, but it might be effective as well. So I don't really know.
Thank you.
can tell you how I want it to be. I can't tell you how the reality of it is, but you know, how I want it to be is I want it to be something that's culturally ingrained in us, like as a society. You know, to want to see under the hood, to want to see what people are, you know, to want to see the good and the bad, and to be able to make an individual decision as to whether or not the product I'm buying is a net positive for the world or a net negative. So I want it to be a cultural thing. Now, I'm not, you know, I probably have like the least number of Twitter followers in the room, and I'm probably, you know, not very, you know, savvy when it comes to marketing and that sort of thing. But that's, to answer your question, that's what I, you know, what I think. I think it should be a cultural and a social thing where people, you know, understand that you can't get all good, but try to stay away from, you know, the ones that are more bad than good.
I'll give you just one example of the point that you just made, which is the label that you see on tuna, the dolphin safe tuna, it didn't come from a regulation. It came from people who wanted to know that the tuna that they were eating was not harming dolphins. And it's a perfect example. And it's a perfect example of why these three are such an important part of the environmental movement. Let's give them a round of applause and congratulate them on their